Writing the equation of a sine or cosine function given its graph, problem type 2. Once again, when we are thinking about the graph of a function, of a trigonometric function, sine or cosine, we have four parameters we can work with. A is the amplitude, B is the related to the period, C is the phase shift, and D is the vertical shift. So let's take a look at a graph here and start working on analyzing this curve. As we saw in problem type 1, the first thing that I want to do is look at the range, the vertical extents. At the bottom, we are at 0. At the top, we are at 2. Right in the middle is, of course, 1, and that's going to be my vertical shift. That's going to be my value of D. I also want to look for the distance from the center to the top, which should be the same as the distance from the center to the bottom. In this case, that's also 1. And that's going to be the value of my amplitude A in the curve. All right, so that's one thing we can look at. The next thing I look at, again, one of the key things we have to pay attention to, is the y-intercept. In this case, we are intercepting the y-axis at a peak on this graph. So I know, because we're dealing with a peak, this is not going to be a sine function. This is going to be a cosine function. I also know, because we're exactly on the peak, that the phase shift is going to be 0. So the only thing that I have left is to determine the length of one period of this graph. And when we're thinking about period, we're looking at what does one complete cycle of a cosine wave look like? Well, one complete cycle of the cosine wave starts at the top, drops down to the bottom, and then comes back up to the top. In this case, because I started at 0, I can just read that second point right off of the graph and see that the period on this curve, the distance you have to go from one point until that same point repeats, is 3. Remember, the period of a sine or cosine graph is 2 pi over b. So in this case, b is 2/3 pi. So y equals a, which is 1, times the cosine of b, which is 2 pi over 3 times x, plus c, which is 0, plus d, which is 1. The equation of this particular graph is y equals the cosine of 2 pi over 3x plus 1.